The summer of 1945 hung quietly over Hiroshima. Not a peaceful quiet. A strange, suspended kind of stillness. As if the very air was watching. Listening. Waiting. The sun had risen early, its light pale and thin, spreading across wooden rooftops and narrow streets. A small breeze drifted between the houses, carrying the faint scent of river water and warm soil. At the docks, the morning shift had already begun. Men walked to work with tools in their hands, cigarettes between their lips, and tired eyes staring at the ground ahead of them. War had carved weight into everyone's posture, but life continued, slowly, mechanically, stubbornly. Among the workers was a young engineer named Tsutomu Yamaguchi. 29 years old. Slim. Quiet. Eyes that always looked as though they were thinking of something far away. He moved with gentle steps, as if careful not to disturb the world around him. He carried a roll of blueprints tucked beneath his arm, designs for a project he'd been assigned to oversee. A project he wanted to finish quickly, because he wanted nothing more than to go home. Home. To Nagasaki. To the hills. To the familiar sea. To his wife, who waited for him with soft patience. To his little son, whose laughter lived in his memory like a warm lantern. He had been away for 3 months, long, exhausting months spent living in small rooms, eating what little food could be spared, and working with the shadow of war pressing against his back every hour of every day. But today was different. Today was his last day in Hiroshima. Tomorrow morning, he would board a train and return home. He had rehearsed that journey in his mind many times. The rumbling wheels. The passing countryside. The soft rhythm that always lulled him to sleep. He took a slow breath, letting the humid air fill his lungs. A small hint of relief settled in his chest. But the air felt heavier than usual. As if something unseen sat upon it. He ignored the feeling. He continued walking. The streets were calm. A tram rattled past, squealing softly as it curved along its tracks. A woman swept the doorstep of her shop. Children chased one another, their laughter brief and fragile. Life felt ordinary. It felt safe. But beneath that ordinary surface, the city waited on the edge of a moment that none of its people could imagine. A moment already falling toward them. A moment already decided. A moment that would remake the world. Yamaguchi reached the shipyard gates. Workers gave him brief nods as they passed. Someone muttered a greeting. Someone else wiped sweat from his brow despite the early hour. Inside the yard, cranes and metal frames stood like silent skeletons against the sky. Machines slept, waiting for hands to awaken them. The clang of tools began slowly, echoing across the water. Yamaguchi set down his blueprints and unrolled them carefully. The lines and numbers soothed him, clean, orderly, predictable. Unlike war. Unlike the chaos that flickered across the radio each night. He traced a finger across one of the drawings, mentally reviewing measurements. He was thinking of small adjustments he needed to make, when a distant hum drifted through the air. He paused. Turned slightly. The hum grew louder. A low, steady vibration. Not thunder. Not engines he recognized. Other men began to look around. Some frowned. A few shaded their eyes against the sun. Yamaguchi stepped out into the open yard and peered upward. A single aircraft. Far above. Gliding slowly across the sky. He narrowed his eyes. The plane seemed almost peaceful in its movement, floating like a silver leaf on a pale blue canvas. But something about its presence felt wrong. Wrong in a way he could not name. He took a step forward. Then another. Men around him whispered. What plane is that? Why is it alone? Where are the others? The hum deepened. The aircraft released something. A small black object. Falling. Yamaguchi's mouth opened slightly. He leaned forward to focus. A strange unease crawled through his veins. The object fell faster. A glint of metal. A twisting shape. Then. A flash. Not a flash like lightning. This flash had no color. It was not yellow. It was not orange. It was not even light. It was everything. A whiteness so absolute it erased the world. The sky disappeared. The shadows vanished. The ground beneath him dissolved into nothing. Yamaguchi saw nothing. He felt nothing. For a single impossible instant, he existed inside pure white. Then the world returned all at once. A shockwave ripped through him, slamming into his chest with the force of a giant's fist. The air screamed. Heat swallowed the ground. His vision fractured into shards of color and shadow. He was thrown backward. His body struck the dirt. His ears exploded with ringing. His breath fled from his lungs. Seconds passed in a slow, crushing blur. He opened his eyes. The world was fire. Buildings collapsed into clouds of dust. Walls crumbled. Windows shattered into storms of glass. A roaring wind tore across the shipyard, carrying splinters, metal, and screams. Men he had spoken to minutes earlier were now silhouettes stumbling through smoke. Their clothes burning. Their skin peeling. Their voices cracking into broken cries. A column of smoke rose into the sky like a dark pillar, swelling and twisting, blooming into a monstrous shape that swallowed the heavens. The white flash had become a black sun. Yamaguchi tried to stand, but his legs trembled beneath him. His left arm burned. His face stung sharply, as if sliced by invisible blades. His skin blistered under the heat. He pressed a hand against the ground to steady himself. Ash drifted like snow. The air tasted metallic and hot, filling his mouth with bitterness. He looked around. Where the shipyard had been, there was now a wasteland. Wood fragments smoldered. Metal beams bent and twisted like paper. Bodies lay scattered, unmoving. Some crawled. Some reached into empty space. Some whispered unfinished words. A soft ringing filled his ears. A thin, endless sound that buried everything else beneath it. But he forced himself to move. He staggered across the broken yard, stepping over debris and shattered tools. Heat radiated from every direction. Smoke thickened around him. He covered his mouth with his sleeve, but it did little. The air clawed at his throat. A few minutes earlier, he had been thinking of going home. Now, he wasn't sure he would live long enough to see the next hour. He walked blindly through the ruins. The world swayed with each step. His arm throbbed. A warm stream of blood slid down his wrist. He stumbled over a fallen beam and caught himself. The pain in his arm flared, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. Around him, the city had become a furnace. Streets glowed with ember red. Flames crackled on rooftops. Black smoke poured upward in thick, choking waves. People emerged from the haze like ghosts. Faces swollen. Hair burnt away. Clothes barely clinging to their bodies. Some cried for help. Some called out names. Some simply wandered with blank eyes, as if searching for a world that no longer existed. A child clung to a wooden plank, staring at the sky with empty expression. A woman knelt on the ground, holding the remains of a photograph. Two men dragged a third whose legs no longer moved. Yamaguchi forced himself not to stop. If he stopped, he feared he would not start again. His mind repeated only one thought. Survive. He pushed through the smoke, each breath a battle. His eyes watered. His skin ached. His vision blurred again and again. But he kept walking. The fires roared around him, devouring everything in their path. The once lively streets were now rivers of flame. He reached a ditch and climbed down into it, hoping the air would be cleaner below. It wasn't. Smoke curled along the ground, thick and suffocating. But it shielded him from the worst of the heat. He crawled forward, dragging himself toward the outskirts of the city, where the sky looked slightly less dark. Behind him, Hiroshima burned. Ahead of him, he hoped, there might still be life. He emerged from the ditch several minutes later, coughing violently. The world tilted. His legs buckled, and he collapsed to his knees. But he refused to stay down. He pressed his hand against the dirt, steadying himself, and stood again. He looked back once. Just once. The city he had walked through that morning, quiet, alive, ordinary, was now an ocean of fire and smoke stretching endlessly across the horizon. The sky above it pulsed with an orange glow, lighting the clouds from below as if the earth itself had opened and swallowed the sun. He turned away. There was nothing left for him there. He walked toward the edge of Hiroshima, each step slow, deliberate, echoing through the ruins. Step by step, breath by breath, he moved forward, refusing to fall. Hours passed. And when he finally reached the outskirts, the fires behind him had begun to dim, replaced by black ash drifting through a silent, wounded sky. The sun sank slowly, casting long shadows across the broken land. Yamaguchi found a small military shelter filled with other survivors. Faces he could not recognize. Voices too weak to speak. Bodies trembling with shock. He entered quietly, sat in a corner, and closed his eyes. His arm throbbed. His skin burned. His heart pounded. But he was alive. Barely. Outside, Hiroshima continued to crumble. Inside, Yamaguchi listened to the faint crack of distant collapse. And he wondered, in a quiet, trembling thought, how a single flash of light could erase an entire city. And in the silence that followed, as the wind shifted over the wasteland, the truth settled slowly over him. That nothing familiar remained. Nothing that could anchor the world back into its old shape. The streets he had walked since childhood were gone. The tram wires that once hummed above his head were curled on the ground like blackened vines. The riverbanks where children once played were lined with drifting ash, thick enough to leave footprints like snow. He stood there, unmoving, as if the quiet itself was holding him in place. The air carried a metallic scent, sharp, unnatural, as though the city had been burned, not by fire, but by something that didn't belong to the world of humans at all. He raised a hand to his face, felt the grit of dust against his skin, and blinked slowly. Every movement felt delayed, as if time had not fully restarted. After the flash, somewhere behind him, a beam collapsed with a muted thud. Not violent, not dramatic, just the quiet surrender of a structure with no life left inside it. He turned his head, and for a moment, it seemed as though shadows were moving. Not people, just the wavering silhouettes of objects still too hot to hold their shape. The heat distorted everything, bending lines, warping distance, making the ruins ripple like reflections on disturbed water. He took a step forward. The ground cracked softly under his feet. A thin layer of glass-like dust crumbled, formed from sand and stone, melted and fused in a single impossible instant. The world around him was stripped of sound. No voices, no footsteps, no distant chatter of a waking city. Just the faint hiss of fires burning without urgency, as if even the flames had grown tired. He moved slowly, carefully, as though afraid the earth itself might break apart beneath him. Every breath tasted bitter. Every blink stung. The sky above him, once bright with summer light, had dimmed into a muted bronze, a color that didn't belong to the natural world. Ahead of him, a twisted fragment of a wall remained standing, its surface scorched into patterns that looked almost like fingerprints on stone. Beside it lay a bicycle, its frame bent, its tires melted into dark puddles. He paused. The shape was too familiar. He knew someone who owned that bicycle. But he could not bring himself to look closer. He kept walking, past the outlines of houses that no longer had walls, past shadows on the ground, shadows that belonged to things no longer there. Some were small, some were ordinary. A bucket, a ladder, a single sandal. Others were unmistakably human. But he did not stop. Stopping meant understanding. And understanding was still too far away. He moved through the ruin, as if walking through a dream, one where the world had been hollowed out, its colors drained, its edges softened by dust and memory. Above him, the heat shimmered like a veil over the sky. It made the sun look distant, blurred, as if even the heavens had been changed by the light that fell upon the city. He felt the faint tremor of his own heartbeat, slow and uneven, echoing inside his chest. It was the only sign that time was still moving forward. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. Time had no shape here. Only the landscape did. And even that seemed to dissolve. If he looked at it too long, he reached a crossroads. The place where three streets once met. A lively corner, where vendors set out crates of fruit and vegetables each morning. Now, only fragments remained. A cracked sign, a piece of wood with charred paint, a stone basin overturned and filled with ash. Here, too, he did not stop. He stepped over what was left, moving deeper into the silence, deeper into the heart of what had once been his home. He felt something warm on his shoulder. Not comforting, just heat, radiating from a nearby pile of rubble that still smoldered. He brushed it off gently, realizing only then how thin his clothing had become, how much fabric had burned away. Without him noticing, a memory surfaced. Brief, uninvited. His mother calling him from the kitchen. On a summer morning, the sound of her voice carried through the open window. It was so clear. He almost turned toward it. But the wind carried only ash. He kept moving. His steps were slow, measured, as though pacing through a graveyard. And in a way, he was a graveyard with no markers, no boundaries, no names, just the remnants of a moment so bright it obliterated everything it touched. He walked until the air grew hotter again, until the ruins around him seemed to glow from within, until the horizon wavered like a mirage. And still he walked, because stopping meant letting the silence close in around him. And he was not ready for that. Not yet. He walked past what had once been a bustling marketplace. Crates lay broken and blackened. A fish stall, its sign burned, still smelled faintly of smoke and salt. The river nearby no longer rippled, it boiled, thick with ash and debris. Birds were gone. Even insects had vanished. He stepped carefully, avoiding patches of molten earth. Each step left a faint imprint in the ash, a fragile mark that the world would soon reclaim. Somewhere ahead, a wall collapsed with a sound like distant thunder. But no one flinched, because no one remained to notice. The sun hung low now, smearing the sky in copper and bronze. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the ruins, as if trying to escape the devastation. Yamaguchi's face ached under the persistent heat. His skin felt tight, raw, blistering under what remained of his clothes. Every breath burned in his lungs. But still he moved forward. At one point, he passed a bicycle crushed beneath a beam. Its wheels twisted like molten metal, its frame barely recognizable. And yet, for a fleeting moment, he imagined someone had ridden it here that morning. Someone laughing, carefree, alive. The image tore at him. But he kept walking. Because grief could not save him. Every corner brought another revelation. A collapsed school, its blackened doors hanging on charred hinges. A theater, the roof melted and fallen into the seats. Streets lined with fragments of humanity. A shoe here, a scarf there, a handkerchief caught on a splintered pole. Objects that once belonged to life. Now relics of a city swallowed whole. He paused only briefly to glance back. The city's edges had been swallowed by smoke and fire, turning the world behind him into an unrecognizable blur. Even the river seemed to be mourning. Its water dark and heavy, carrying ash downstream like a silent funeral procession. A distant wail reached him. Not loud. Not sharp. Just a faint, broken sound carried by the wind. He did not respond. There was nothing he could do. The world had already decided. He pressed on. His steps were slow, deliberate, each one a victory over exhaustion, over shock, over disbelief. The horizon stretched endlessly, scarred by flame and smoke. And he realized the enormity of what had happened. Hiroshima was gone. Gone. And yet, he was alive. He found a small shelter at the edge of the city. A military dugout, half buried in ash and rubble. Inside, other survivors had gathered. Faces as pale as ghosts, eyes wide, limbs trembling. Some whispered prayers, others wept silently. He sank to the floor beside them. His body shaking uncontrollably. The heat of his burns clung to him like a second skin. And for the first time since the flash, he allowed himself to notice the depth of exhaustion, the weight of survival. The night came slowly, unevenly. Outside, the fires dimmed, leaving only smoldering shadows in their wake. The wind shifted and carried the faint, acrid smell of burning flesh and ash. Yamaguchi lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the shelter, listening to the faint groans and coughs of others. Sleep was impossible. Memory and reality were blurred. He could not forget the flash, the heat, the silence. He could not forget the city's sudden absence. Dawn arrived dimly, muted by lingering smoke. He rose, stiff and aching, and stepped outside. The landscape was alien. He could see the faint outline of the river, black and lifeless, flowing silently past flattened streets. Trees were gone, uprooted, charred. Birdsong was replaced by an eerie stillness. He thought of his family in Nagasaki, of his wife, of his child. A fragile hope rose in him, tempered by the fear that nothing had survived. Yet he had no choice but to continue, to leave Hiroshima behind. He walked slowly toward the station, past empty streets, broken trams, and collapsed buildings. Every step reminded him of what he had lost. Every breath reminded him of what he had survived. When he finally boarded a train, the world outside was still scarred. The sky carried the faint glow of fires still burning in the distance. Passengers were silent, pale, each lost in their own private devastation. The train lurched forward. And with each passing mile, Hiroshima became a memory that could never be reclaimed. He stared through the window, watching the landscape blur. The sun rose higher, its light harsh, unforgiving. But in that light, he could see movement. Other survivors, stumbling along roads, searching for family, or simply wandering through the ruins in shock. Hours passed in silence. Occasionally, someone would cough. Sometimes a faint whimper broke the stillness. Yamaguchi closed his eyes, letting the hum of the train and the rhythm of motion lull him into a fragile sense of peace. He allowed himself to hope that tomorrow might be different, that Nagasaki would offer something more than ruin. But fate had not yet finished with him. It was still holding its breath, preparing for the second flash. He returned home. But home no longer felt like a refuge. Walls that once offered comfort now felt fragile, like paper stretched over the frame of memory. The air inside the house smelled of charred wood and lingering smoke, a reminder that even safety carried the imprint of fire. His wife moved quietly around him, preparing what little food they had. His child clung to her skirt, eyes wide, silent. They lived, but the living was now different. Everything ordinary had been stolen. The very act of breathing was a reminder that the world could take it all away. In an instant, days passed in silence. The city of Nagasaki healed slowly. Streets were cleared. Rubble was stacked, burned wood swept aside. But Yamaguchi carried a landscape of ruin in his mind that no reconstruction could erase. Every shadow reminded him of heat, of flash, of screams. Every whisper of wind brought ash from the distance. And with it, the memory of what had been lost. His body bore scars that could not be hidden. Blisters and burns had healed unevenly, leaving patches of raw, pink skin. His hair fell thinly in places, and his hands, once steady, shook with the memory of the blast. He avoided mirrors. He could not bear to see himself and be reminded of the man who had walked through fire twice and carried the weight of so many deaths in silence. Sleep was impossible. Nightmares were constant. Each night, the flash returned. White light. Heat. Silence. Then the roar. Then ash. Then the unending landscape of ruin. Yet he survived. He moved among others, helping where he could, repairing what he could, living in the shadow of two cities that had ceased to exist. People called him lucky. Some whispered that he had been chosen. But Yamaguchi felt no luck. No choice. Only the burden of remembrance. Time passed slowly. The war ended. The world moved on. Cities were rebuilt. Voices returned to the streets. Children laughed again, though not the same. The river flowed once more. But its waters carried memory and ash. And through it all, Yamaguchi lived, walking quietly among the living, a ghost of two forgotten infernos. He rarely spoke of what had happened. Words felt insufficient. Even names of those lost felt fragile, like paper letters caught in the wind. Instead, he kept a careful routine. He went to work. He returned home. He cared for his family. And he remembered silently. Painfully, always. The world changed. But he did not. Or rather, he changed in ways invisible. The fire of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had burned more than buildings. It had burned into his mind, his body, his very soul. Every glance at the sky, every flicker of light, every unexpected sound, all were reminders of the fragility of existence. He became a quiet man, thoughtful, patient, a survivor not of choice, but of circumstance. He understood, more deeply than anyone else could, the thin line that separates life from death, the small and terrible accidents that decide who continues and who is lost. As the years passed, he bore witness silently to the rebuilding of Japan. He watched children grow, streets bloom with commerce, cities rise from ash and ruin. And still, the memory of white light and unbearable heat lingered in the back of his mind, like a shadow stretching across every ordinary day. He became a living reminder, a warning, though silent, a testament to the unimaginable power of man's creations, and the fragile persistence of life. Though he survived twice, he carried both cities with him. In every scar, in every twitch of muscle, in every quiet moment of reflection. And when he finally grew old, his body frail, his hands trembling, he understood that survival was not victory. It was endurance. A slow, painful endurance that stretched across decades, shaping every thought, every action, every quiet breath. Even in the final years of his life, he remained haunted, not by what he had seen, but by what the world had almost erased. Not by the flash itself, but by the fragile, impossible fact that he had walked through fire twice and carried on. alone and unchosen. While millions had perished, the world had never forgiven him. Nor would it ever. Yet he continued. Because that was all survival demanded. No celebration. No relief. Only the quiet, endless act of enduring. As cities rose and fell again. In memory, in shadow, in ash. And so he lived. Bearing the weight of Hiroshima and Nagasaki within him. Walking slowly through a world rebuilt. From the bones of what once was. His life a fragile thread. Between what had been destroyed. And what stubbornly remained. Years turned into decades. The scars on his body faded. But the scars in his mind never did. He walked through the streets of a rebuilt Nagasaki. Streets that buzzed with life. Children laughing, markets opening, trains rattling. And yet, he felt like a ghost. Wandering among the living. Every shadow reminded him of ash. Every flicker of sunlight reminded him of fire. Every distant echo of laughter reminded him of silence. The silence of Hiroshima, the silence of Nagasaki. He rarely spoke of those days. Words were weak against the enormity of what he had survived. Friends, neighbors, colleagues. They called him lucky, remarkable, blessed. He simply nodded. Inside, he carried the weight of 2 cities. Their memories etched into every thought. Every heartbeat. Every trembling hand. He visited Hiroshima once more, decades later. The city was unrecognizable. Streets gleamed with light. Flowers bloomed in parks. Children ran, unscarred and carefree. Yet when he stood among them, he saw ghosts. Flickers of light, heat, dust. Faces that had been lost. Cries that had been silenced. Streets that had disappeared. And he felt the pull of time. The impossibility of restoring what had been stolen. In his own home, he lived quietly with his family. His wife's hair had grayed. His son had grown, a man of his own making. He held them close. Fragile reminders that life persisted. Even after the unimaginable. But even their presence could not erase the memory. Of fire swallowing all that was ordinary. Or the weight of survival itself. He became a quiet figure in the community. Someone who moved slowly, deliberately. Never calling attention, never seeking recognition. He did not need it. The world remembered his survival. But never the cost. The world marveled at the miracle. But did not understand the shadow it left behind. At night, he would sit alone. Sometimes staring at the sky. Sometimes closing his eyes to the lingering memory. Of white light, heat, and silence. He remembered faces, objects, streets, rivers. Everything burned into the lens of memory. By flashes of light that no one else could imagine. He lived long enough to see Hiroshima and Nagasaki thrive. To see Japan recover from the scars of war. To witness life continue despite all evidence of destruction. And yet, he carried the ghosts of 2 cities. Inside him, always, silently. In his later years. He often walked through quiet gardens. Feeling the wind. The gentle rustle of leaves. And the sun's warmth. Small comforts after decades of fire and ash. He understood, finally. That survival was not triumph. It was not escape. It was endurance. A long, fragile, painful endurance. That stretched across time. Linking the past and present. Through memory, scar, and breath. When he passed. It was quietly, without spectacle. No flash, no roar, no white light. Only the slow closing of eyes that had seen too much. And yet, in his death, he left behind a story that the world could neither ignore nor fully understand. A man who survived both Hiroshima and Nagasaki was more than a survivor. He was a living testament to the fragility of life, the enormity of loss, and the quiet persistence of the human spirit. Cities would rise. Cities would fall. Time would move relentlessly forward. and somewhere in the hearts of those who remembered, the memory of a single man who walked through fire twice and lived would linger, dark, silent, unbroken, like ash drifting through sunlight.